Made on Zencaster.
Because Zencaster makes every stage of the podcast production and distribution process so easy. All the details are in the description. Hello and welcome to Fit for My Age, the health and wellbeing podcast from Abeceda. I am Michael Millward, the Managing Director of Abeceda. Today, George Bell is going to be a man about it as we discuss what positive masculinity looks and feels like. George is the author of a book called Be a Man About It, which athlete Dwayne Chambers described as a guide for men and those that care about them. George is based in southeast London, one of the places that I have not visited. I very rarely go south of the river. If I get the opportunity to visit, I will make use of my membership of the Ultimate Travel Club to make all of my travel arrangements. That is because as a member of the Ultimate Travel Club, I can travel at trade prices on flights, hotels, trains, holidays, and so many more travel-related purchases. I'd like you to be able to travel at those same trade prices, so I have put a link in the description with a built-in discount on membership of the Ultimate Travel Club. So we'll all be traveling at trade prices. Now that I have paid some bills, it is time to make an episode of Fit for My Age that will be well worth listening to, liking, downloading, and subscribing to. And also probably worth telling your friends, family, and work colleagues about as well. Very importantly, on Fit for My Age, we do not tell you what to think, but we do hope to make you think. Hello, George.
Michael, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and finding out
me too.
about masculinity. But why write a book about masculinity? What is it that you do for a job that leads you to writing a book about masculinity?
Yeah, that's always the big question. Really, everyone asks, why the book? And I've got a very professional interest in this subject area. I've been working in the mental health space for almost 10 years now. So professionally, there's that real interest there, but it started from a very, very personal reason, very, very personal interest, which was just over 10 years ago. I was really struggling with my mental health. I'd got myself into, I think, just what I describe as like a hole, a really, really deep hole where I couldn't see a way out, or almost this, this tunnel. People talk about light at the end of the tunnel, and I couldn't see that. It just felt, I was in a real, dark place, and I neglected it. I didn't do anything about it. And that eventually, it snowballed, and it got me to a place where I was making plans to take my own life. So at the age of 20, that was my experience, which, looking back now, it's just way too young to be holding something as heavy as that. And I think what made it so much worse is that I was holding it on my own, because being a man, I believed that I couldn't talk about this stuff. I'd almost been falsely tricked into believing this lie that so many men are taught, that we don't open up about this stuff. We don't talk about it. We don't acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge that we have emotions. We don't acknowledge that we have difficult emotions. And you just never, you never talk about it. And so I just kept it quiet. I kept it quiet from everyone. I had an amazing network of people around me that would have been willing to help, in a moment's notice. But I didn't give anyone a chance to do that. Obviously, things got better. I'm still here today, but it almost went a very, very different way for me.
Almost, but fortunately not.
Exactly. And there was obviously a lot in that, to getting me to that point. But when I got through that, I wanted to come and work in the mental health space. But I've always had an interest in men's mental health and masculinity, knowing my own experience and knowing that I was almost dealing with two challenges at the same time. I was dealing with the mental health issues, but then I was also dealing with this faulty sense of masculinity that had tricked me into believing I couldn't talk about it. And that almost cost me my life. So yeah, that was my story. But I know it's not necessarily a unique story. I know that hundreds of thousands of men are still facing this every single day. So that's the professional interest in the book as well. I didn't just write this book for the sake of it. I wrote it because I believe it's really needed, and I think we can see that in the stats around the world.
I totally agree with you, and I have to tell you, I love the title.
Thanks. Yeah,
The title is one of those expressions that is used to, be a man about it. To have someone say that to you means automatically that you are somehow less of.
Yeah.
You are not
Yeah.
fulfilling some sort of standard of being a man, whatever that is. And yet it seems like, what is it that you're supposed to be
Mm.
is the question that we can't really answer. It's just that, like with most things, I suppose we know what we're not supposed to be.
Yeah. And we've made it a very narrow version of masculinity. That when we tell men to be a man about it or man up, there's a very, very narrow set of traits that we're referring to there, which is generally be silent, be strong, be independent, and get on with it. And that's kind of it. But humans are way, way more complex than that. And they're way, way more complex than we've made masculinity into. It's not this tiny, narrow set of traits. So I think you're so right that these phrases it essentially shames men into thinking that they need to be a certain way, and that certain way is very, very limited and very, very narrow. And because humans aren't built like that, I think we're seeing the pressure that men are facing, and the consequences of what happens when men are going through things and they're not fitting into this box that they've been told they have to fit into. Because we all face stuff in life, right? No matter how strong you think you are, you're going to go through grief, loss, potentially financial issues, all kinds of stuff. And humans were built to respond to that in a certain way with emotion. But because men have been told they can't show that, it's the way I describe it in the book. It's almost like a pressure cooker. This pressure is just building and building and building. Men constantly trying to be strong and tough on the outside, all the while this pressure is building on the inside. At some point, when pressure reaches a certain level, it has to go somewhere, right? It can't sustain itself forever. And if you don't do anything about it, if you don't release that in a healthy way, then often the thing containing the pressure goes pop or it goes crack. And I think that is we're seeing the result of that in men and some of the devastating statistics.
Yeah, you've just described almost what happened to you 10 years ago when you were 20.
Yeah,
Pressure cracks, and one of the ways in which to release that is to go down a negative route.
yeah,
But you went down a positive route instead.
yep,
I'm intrigued, and I know it's extremely personal, but you've written a book about it, so I'm going to
yeah,
ask,
yeah.
what's the sort of like the process that you can remember of making that change? There is this one option which is extremely negative. There is this other option which is extremely positive, but must have seemed almost impossible to achieve. What's the sort of process that you go through to go down that positive route?
Yeah, it started for me with my girlfriend at the time called me out on some abnormal
Mhm.
behavior. So she said to me, you're really cold and distant and withdrawn. That was a that was kind of like a bit of cold water being thrown in my face, because up until that point I believed that I was wearing the mask really well. I believed that when I was around people I was doing what I believed I had to do as a man, smile, be confident, have fun, all the rest of it. And then when I was on my own, I could then almost retreat into my depression and my mental health issues. But I think her saying that was clear that actually these two worlds weren't separate, and it was starting to impact other people. I just sort of opened up in that moment. It wasn't very articulate. I didn't really know what I was saying. I couldn't really explain it. I think I just said something like, I feel weird. That was pretty much the extent of it. But it didn't matter, because finally I had voiced it. It was out of my head and it was out into the open. She was really good about it. She got my mum involved, told my mum. My mum got me down the doctors. I was sort of then going through this process of, I'd built up all these walls and barriers, believing that I could never talk about this stuff because that's what men should do. And then actually, as more people found out, the world didn't collapse in on itself. People didn't run away. People were there to help me. It started to give me a bit of confidence. It started to break down some of these barriers I'd built. And I think that was such a fundamental part for me choosing a different path and getting better, was actually at the same time kind of deconstructing these faulty beliefs I had around masculinity. I was almost testing the world around me. I'd almost been taught to never talk about this stuff, and if we do, we're not a real man. But then actually, the evidence I was getting back showed that wasn't true. It showed that when I did talk about it to people around me, they cared and they wanted to help me, and the world didn't end, and things didn't go wrong. And so that gave me the confidence to then tell friends, and I opened up a little bit more, and then I got more people involved, and then I decided to go to therapy. And so I kept sort of dipping my toe into the water with it, and I kept getting really positive signals back. So I kind of went through that process for a year. I was working on the mental health issues, but I was also I was reconstructing what masculinity looked like to me. It wasn't easy. I'm not going to say it happened overnight, because it doesn't. I was 20 years old at this point, so I was dealing with two decades of beliefs I have. Some people don't tackle this stuff until much later. Some people are dealing with decades and decades of kind of learned beliefs and behaviors. So it's not an overnight fix, but it's one of those things that can change and does change. It just takes a bit of time, right?
It does. But when you say 2 decades of beliefs because you were 20 years old, at what sort of point is it really 2 decades? Because I'm thinking, like, at what type of age do boys start to be imprinted with this expectation of how a boy behaves, how a man behaves? When does it start?
I mean, really, it starts immediately, and I think how much are you kind of absorbing around concept of masculinity when you're a month old or a year old? Maybe not loads and loads of lessons, but I think the trouble is we almost don't know. We know that babies and kids are really, really impressionable, and they're soaking up the world around them, and they're not always doing it through a lens of emotional intelligence and awareness, because they're so young that the whole world's new to them. So things that you and I could see now and rationally know that it's not it doesn't affect us, or it's not a reflection on us. As a kid, a small action or a small thing you see on the street can almost inform your whole worldview in a way that you don't fully understand. So I think we pick up a lot, and we pick it up in different ways. Like I had a really good childhood, two loving parents. It wasn't like they were ever really, really tough on me. They weren't telling me on a daily basis to man up, to be tougher. But then at the same time, I was playing with action man figures who are built a certain, they've got a certain muscularity to them, and we were watching James Bond reruns on the on films and TV all the time, and James Bond is this impossibly masculine man, but that was kind of the role model at the time. And then on the way home from school, I'd see Calvin Klein adverts on billboards, and Calvin Klein models, they look a certain way. So I think you're just constantly absorbing this notion of what it means to be a man in off comments in TV and the things you see. It's not always really explicit. It's not like I go back and I say there was this one moment that someone said something to me and that forever changed me. It's just this kind of constant absorption.
When I was preparing to have this conversation with you, I was thinking about those role models of masculinity that we take in from a very young age. And the things that came to mind were exactly the ones that you mentioned. Like the James Bond, that's like the tall, dark, suave, in a suit, women fall at his feet. The physical role models of like the athletes, the underwear models who've probably starved themselves into a situation so they can have their photograph taken in a particular way, in a particular light, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
It's acting. It's all fulfilling some sort of role. Because I'm older than you, I was also thinking about those, got Hollywood golden era male role models of John Wayne. This is how a man is, type of thing. It's all, like you say, the strong, silent type. But you never actually understand what that person is feeling at any particular point in time or what's going on for them. It's all almost about what they do for other people. But it's also that for you to go down that positive route required someone around you who cared for you to actually say, what's going on. This is not something that any man really is ever going to be able to challenge or change by themselves.
Yeah, and the important thing for me as well is that it was a woman, or two women initially who got involved. And I think the conversation around masculinity it can get quite divisive quite quickly, quite political. And I understand why, I understand where it comes from. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, a lot of sensitivity around this subject. But I think for me, I just try to strip as much of that away as possible, and just come at it from the place of being a human, and knowing the kind of pain that I was in, knowing that a lot of other men are in that pain, and also knowing that two women saved my life, basically.
Okay. Because you say two women saved your life, and that's brilliant, fantastic. But what role do women play in reinforcing these negative masculine role models? What's the sort of role that women play in that?
I think that the perception can get reinforced from both sides. Men are telling each other they have to be strong, and there's the perception that's what women are looking for when they're dating, for example. Or parents might say an off the cuff mark. Mother might say off the cuff mark to their child. Their child may be falling over. Their son's fallen over, cut his knee, and maybe she says, "Oh, man up. It's all right. Just man up about it.
You're a big boy now.
You're a big boy." And it's intended to be, it's well meaning. She's trying to sort of give the son some confidence, maybe. But again, we talk about these things that, we said when you're a kid, these things can be enormous. You're not able to process them in the way. If someone said that to me now, I can rationally understand why they're saying it and all the rest of it. Whereas as a kid, it's almost like your emotion has been shut down. Maybe you're really hurting, and you're crying, and if someone tells you to toughen up, they're doing it well meaning. Actually, the way you internalize that might be, I cried and I shouldn't have. I've been told not to, and so that
Yeah.
becomes your lesson. So I think that people reinforce stuff that they don't always mean to, and then other people, I think maybe do. They talk about wanting the strong man type. I've seen criticism of men who maybe are, lots of overt shows of emotion. I've seen criticism around that. So I think obviously everyone has their own preferences to what they want in things like dating, for example. But
Yes.
we all have a responsibility to change this perception around masculinity. We all reinforce it in our own ways, regardless of gender. So I think we all have a responsibility to help break it down.
We all have a responsibility, but putting it into action, what would you say is the way forward so that we end up, as we're in 2026?
Yep.
What's the positive vision of what masculinity could be like in the future? What is it that we need to do?
So the way that I have tried to reach men, and I think the way that I feel this has landed within this conversation, is that I think in recent years our solution in trying to reach more men has just been to talk about male mental health. And we say, let's talk more about male mental health. And we've told men, it's okay to talk when you're struggling. Obviously all of that is very, very important and needed. And, it's a noble message. But it's also a really difficult one for a man to get and to understand, because, we come back to this decades of conditioning, this decades of beliefs. If a man, let's say there's a man that's 40 years old, for pretty much 40 years, he's been told never to talk. And then actually the message, the advert on a tube is just talk about it. That's, near on impossible to do, because you spent your whole life believing you shouldn't. And I think that mental health itself can seem like quite an abstract concept to men. So the way that I've approached it, the way I've structured my book, is talking about the specific topics that men are facing every single day, the things they're sat with, the things they're thinking about. Maybe they're not talking about it, but it's the thing they're carrying. And that means talking about things like erectile dysfunction, hair loss, fatherhood, money, sex, dating, gambling, gaming, alcohol. These very, very specific topics. They can be quite nitty gritty. They can be quite awkward. As a society, we may not want to approach them. But I think we talk about these things, and that's how you draw men in, because that's the thing they're really, really thinking about. They're not always sat there thinking, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm going through shame or embarrassment. They're thinking, I'm losing my hair and I don't like it. And if you go in let's say you go in at the hair loss conversation. So for example, I've had a hair transplant, and I talk about it really openly online. And I've had more men reach out to me in the last year on hair loss than I have had on mental health in 10 years, because it creates that kind of jump off point for men. And then, we're still having a conversation about masculinity and mental health. It might not be explicit, but if a man has messaged me to say, I'm losing my hair and I don't like it, that is a conversation about mental health, because you're talking about identity and shame and embarrassment, all this kind of stuff there. But often have to just create that entry point for them. And then I will always ask them, they'll come in quite functionally, and they'll come in and say, where'd you get it done? How much was it? Did it hurt? And I'll always ask something like, how you doing with this? Like, how you feeling about it? And that's when I can open the door and we sort of ladder down into a conversation on mental health. But it doesn't always start there. So I think that's how I've found that we can reach more men. When I go to events, I talk about these topics. I talk about erectile dysfunction on stage, which can make people uncomfortable. But I think these are the things that draw men in, and how we reach them.
Yes, I can see what you mean. We've had episodes of Fit for My Age where we've talked to hair transplant surgeons about the process of having a hair transplant and the impact that it has on people's mental health as a result of, the person that I now see in the mirror looks a little bit more like me, because it's one of those processes. You can feel you're at this age, but because you look in the mirror and see a different age, it just disconnects completely. So we've covered that on Fit for
Great.
My Age. We also covered the erectile dysfunction issue as well, and having a serious conversation about men's health issues is very difficult for individual men, very difficult for groups of men, because it's not something that has happened before. One guy said to me that he'd learnt more about the aging process that men go through from comedians on YouTube than he'd ever learnt from anywhere else, because it's where do you get the information from? And it was the joke that was told on a YouTube video that led to him then investigating it, because the joke told him that what was happening to him was not unique. It was happening to everyone, basically.
Yeah, and it's a good point, right? Like, where are we getting this education from? That
Yeah.
for me, I had to go through this horrendous experience with my mental health, which basically I was forced to stop and completely redefine everything I knew about being a man. Then I had to go on this journey of self-learning. I had to learn about emotions. What are emotions? Okay, I have them. What is mental health? Really sounds really, really basic now I explain it, but I had to learn that I actually have mental health. Whereas, if I've been taught this stuff at a younger age, if I've been taught this stuff in schools, I don't believe I would have ever got to the point that I did, such a serious place.
Yeah, it's about understanding yourself and how to manage yourself through those difficult times in a way that works for you as an individual, without having to worry, I suppose, about what society might think.
Yeah, exactly.
Your story is one of, the people that mind don't matter. The people that matter minded about you.
Yeah.
What you're saying, I suppose, then, is that we need to understand more about ourselves as individuals, take ownership of ourselves, and work more at creating our own version for ourselves of what we want to be as men, rather than trying to fulfill something that has been invented to be not ideal, but idealistic. The Calvin Klein models, any model who can sell underwear products, all power to them. They work extremely hard to get those bodies. I know they do. Right? I've been to the gym. I know how long it takes to get those sorts of bodies, and I am centuries away from being in that sort of situation. So loads of respect to them, but they are people who work very hard at that. They're not us everyday ordinary type blokes. Being ideal or being idealistic, and the ideal is defined by you, isn't it?
Yeah, whenever I do this work, obviously people come to the question of, so what does a flexible or more positive version of masculinity look like? Everyone kind of wants that answer, and I think in this day and age, we want the simple answer, right? We want it kind of figured out for us. But I think the reality is there's obviously not one answer to that question. Like, I can't just sit here now and give you 10 bullet points and say, do this, and you're being a positive version of a man. I think it is so subjective and it's so individualistic. But I think what it's about is doing the things and being the person you want to be based on who you want to be, rather than trying to fit into someone else's perception. And that's going to look different to different people. And I think it means that, we're not completely shutting down or rejecting traditional masculinity. Things like strength and competition and leadership and independence. These are traits that a lot of men really, really value, and they want to celebrate that with masculinity. So I think it's about recognizing that, but it's also about recognizing that we're humans first, and that means that we have a side of us that is capable of vulnerability and emotion, compassion, empathy, community, connection, all this stuff. So it's about recognizing that is part of being a man too. And how much you lean into different things is up to you. Some men will think strength is still their kind of main trait, and that is fine. It's just about recognizing there are times for that, and there are times for asking for help, or being compassionate, or whatever it might be. So that really for me is what a positive version of masculinity is that, are you allowing in the entire spectrum of human traits and emotions that you have access to? It's there for a reason. And are you being the version of a man that you want to be, rather than the one that you think you should be for someone else?
Yes, I think that's the important bit. And I think that's what resonates with me the most, is this idea that following the tribe is not the ideal way to be.
Yeah.
Masculinity is about having the courage to stand out from the crowd, to say when something is wrong, even though everyone else is saying that it's right,
Yeah.
and to be yourself. I think that is, for me, is the most important part of it. But
yeah, I like that.
It's fascinating talking to you, George. I really have enjoyed it, and really do recommend the book as well. So Be a Man About It is well worth a read. Thank you very much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Michael. Good to be here.
Thank you. I am Michael Millward, the Managing Director of Abeceda, and in this episode of Fit for My Age, I have been having a conversation with George Bell, the author of Be a Man About It. You can find out more about both of us by using the links in the description. At Fit for My Age, our aim is proactive, positive aging. Knowing the risks early is an important part of maintaining good health. That is why we recommend the health assessments from York Test, especially the annual health test. Performed annually by an experienced phlebotomist who will complete a full blood draw at your home or workplace, the annual health test provides an assessment of 39 different health markers. After hospital standard tests are carried out in a UK AS accredited and CQC compliant laboratory, you will be able to access your easy to understand results and guidance to help you make effective lifestyle changes anytime via your secure personal wellness hub account. There is a link, and as you would expect, a discount code in the description. I am sure you will have enjoyed listening to this episode of Fit for My Age as much as George and I have enjoyed making it. Please give it a like and download it so you can listen anytime, anywhere. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, please subscribe. You will probably also want to tell your friends, family and work colleagues about Fit for My Age as well, and the men in your life about this particular episode. Remember, the aim of all the podcasts produced by Abeceda is not to tell you what to think, but we do hope to have made you think. Until the next episode of Fit for My Age, thank you for listening, and goodbye.